class or two of this quarter, we will not be in the Bible as much as I like to be in the Bible in a Bible class. When you go to Bible class, you should be using the Bible, you would think, right? Although when you teach the junior high and the senior high class sometimes, and they don't show up with their Bibles, you wonder, well, we go to Bible class and we forget our textbook for class. But we won't be in the Bible. These first couple classes are going to be mainly as an overview and introduction to the study. So don't get discouraged if you don't crack open your Bible this morning. We will be getting into it because what we want to look at is to look at how the Bible and how science are in perfect harmony. Now, I know that doesn't sound right, and I know from what people are telling you, can you drop that down to about halfway, Dan? Is that all the way up, or can you drop that to half on that spot? That thing just really kills me. If you can drop that to half, that would be nice. Okay, so here's the Bible and here's science, and people are not telling us that they're in harmony. People are saying just the opposite. But what I want us to do this quarter is we're going to be following a book that Wayne Jackson wrote by this title, The Bible and Science, and to look at how much the Bible has in it that science has discovered, that science has figured out over the years, and yet it was in the Bible all along. We live in exciting times. We live in exciting times where we have technology that's booming around us. It's hard to keep up with all the technological advances, isn't it? Some of us are not on the cutting edge. I would say all of us, I guess, are not on the cutting edge of technology. And some of us are trying to catch up, and others of us have just said, forget it. It's not worth it. But with science and these studies that are done and the experiments that are done, all sorts of technology has come about. But with that technology has come this question, that is, has modern science made the Bible obsolete? We have all this technology, we have all of these modern sciences, and then we have this book that is really old. We have this book that is ancient, written thousands of years ago by uneducated men. Did they have PhDs? When you turn to these books in the Bible, do they have any letters after the names of the writers? They're not very educated. And then we come and we look at our scientists. We come and we look at all of these people today who are helping us to make these advances. And how do we balance that? How do you balance, here's the Bible, this old book, been around for a long time, and here's all of this science. Here's all of these technological advances that we are seeing. Here's what we need to know, and here's what we're going to establish this entire quarter. And that is this fact, that the Bible and, do I have the word up here? True science. That's a key word in this class. True science and the Bible are in perfect harmony. Now, some people are going to say the Bible and science are not in harmony. And as we go through this quarter, we're going to have to figure out what are we talking about when we're talking about science. Because when we talk about science and when somebody else talks about science, we might be talking about different things. But did God create the world? Yes or no? Did God create the world? Is He the author of the world, and is He the author of the Bible? If He's the author of the world and if He's the author of the Bible, then do you think the two of them might agree? Do you think the world and the Bible might agree if they have the same author? You think they might have some consistency between them? You see, when you come and study the Bible, we need to understand that those spiritual truths that are there are just as real and just as factual and just as accurate as those scientific references that are there. Some people want to look at these scientific references and say, well, those are ancient, but there might be some spiritual applications we can make from the Bible. The reality is that all of the Bible Every bit of it. Scientific references, spiritual truths, history, geography, every bit of it is accurate. Every bit of it is true. Psalm 119 and verse 160 says, the sum of thy word, S-U-M, the sum of thy word is truth. And so when we look at the Bible and we look at science, there's not going to be any discrepancies. But here's what some people have done. They have made science a religion. You notice that? They've made science a religion. And so what they have done in making it a religion is anytime you pick up a newspaper, anytime you hear on the news that scientists have discovered or scientists say today, all of a sudden it sends off some kind of bells and it's like, oh, I need to know this. I need to hear this. The smartest people on earth, here's what they're saying. Have you noticed that people do that? That science has some magical tone to it. It's like the scientists are the high priests in their white robes, right? You know, and they're marching around inside the holy place in their little laboratories with all of their specimens and all of their chemicals and all of this, and they're the mighty, knowledgeable, whatever they say, whatever they do is flawless and perfect. Science has become a religion. And so, if you disagree with something that science teaches, what does that make you? Stupid. Something's wrong with you. Because the brightest and the best and the high priest and these great men are saying this and you don't agree with them? Oh, we feel sorry for you because you're not very intelligent if you don't agree with them, are you? So here's what we're facing. We are serving a God. We are members of the family of God. We are a part of the only true religion that exists in Christianity. And yet the world has created this other religion over here that we call science. And they have become so enchanted with it that man just seems to have outgrown the need for God. Oh, we're too good for God. We're too smart for God. We don't need God anymore. Look at what these scientists say. The discoveries of astronomers and geologists and space explorers, all of their discoveries, they are so smart. They've made all of these discoveries. And when they've made these discoveries, they have undermined the faith of all but the most devout. See, you've got the devout, and they're not going to give up on what they believe. But people who really are honest and searching, all of these discoveries have undermined their faith. And even among believers, God, He's more likely to be just a force or a spirit of some kind rather than an all-seeing God who's watching over us. So we've made all these discoveries, and it's undermined the faith of these people who don't know any better. With the advent of Darwin's theory of evolution, Dawkins says it is possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. I can know all that I need to know. I can be intellectually challenged. I can be intellectually fulfilled and have no use for God. And that's dangerous. Absolutely is dangerous. And so what we've got to see as we go through this class is there's a serious misunderstanding of what science really is. What science really does do, what it can do, what science cannot do. And that's what I want us to try to define this morning and try to figure out this morning is to try to define what is science. Science in its basic, the basic definition of science is just knowledge. That's what the word means. But what kind of knowledge? Here's the key, if you've got your hand out, here's the key for what kind of knowledge. It is knowledge that is based upon observation and testing. It's not just any old thing you have heard. It is science that has been observed, and true science is not just something that has been observed, but something that has been tested and verified. That's the kind of knowledge that we're talking about. And so there are some things that are loosely called science that are not really science. And we're going to talk about at least one of those as we go through this. Who knows what the scientific method is? You ever heard of the scientific method? What is that? Say again? Okay. You have a hypothesis. And then you go about trying to prove that hypothesis. Guess what? We're going to talk about we're going to go through the scientific method this morning. Aren't you excited? You didn't realize when you lost an hour of sleep last night that we were going to talk about the scientific method. But the scientific method has been set out to try to help, doesn't always do this, but to try to help man to come to true science. Not just this stuff that anybody would say, well, this is scientific, or scientists have discovered, or science says this, but to try to bring us to an end point to say, here's something that is truly scientific. Now, what do you have to have? I think I've looked at various various listings of the scientific method, and I'm sure our science teacher can tell us how many steps are in this. In my scientific method this morning, from what I have found, I'm putting this in 6 steps, all right? Some people might shortcut it and put it into 3 or 4. We're going to have 6 steps to our scientific method. First one is just observation. There's observation of facts. I see something's going on here. And so the first step is I have observed something. Here's something we're going to talk about. Come here. Where'd you go? In order for something to be considered true science, it must be able to be perceived with the senses. What does that mean? I can't go through the scientific method and get to the end. Nothing can be tested by the scientific method. Nothing can come out on the other side and be considered true science if we cannot observe it with our senses. What does that mean about the existence of God? Does that mean that God doesn't exist because we can't perceive Him? Is that what that means? Can I see God? Taste God. Smell God? Hear God? Which one am I leaving out? Touch God. Can I, with my senses, can I perceive God? Yes. How can I do that with my senses? Oh, well, I can look at the world around me and I can perceive the world around me. Am I seeing God? Romans chapter 1 and verse 20 says that that which is the invisible, or that which is visible, those things that have been created, I am able to perceive, I'm able to know that there is a creator. So you're going to use the scientific method to prove the existence of God. Can you do that? Can you use the scientific method to prove the existence of God? Flip this around. Can you use the scientific method to prove evolution? To prove the Big Bang Theory? Why not? Is there any perception with our senses that is able or has been done? Can we observe evolution? Anybody ever observed it? You know why they're looking so intently for this missing link all of these centuries? There's no evidence. You can't see it. It's not there. In order for something to be proven to be scientific, it has to be observable. You got to be able to see it. And then once somebody sees something, once somebody observes some phenomenon, some facts that are there, then they ask a question or they state a problem. So, okay, based upon what I'm seeing, I don't know what's happening here. Why is it doing that? I don't understand. How does that happen? And this is how something begins to be studied in the scientific world. I see something. Why is that? How is that happening? What's going on there? They state a problem. And then, as Trina said, we propose a hypothesis. What's a hypothesis? An educated guess. Could a hypothesis be wrong? Not if you're a man. I mean, if you're a man and you make an educated guess, that's fact. I mean, just take that one to the bank, right? It's going to be right. Can a hypothesis be wrong? Hello, yes. This is not based upon any testing. It's not based upon any experimentation. A hypothesis is just that. Here's what I'm seeing. I don't know how is that happening? And then, well, I'm going to say it must be happening because of this. Here's my hypothesis. Here's my reason for that happening. Do you stop there? Does the scientific method stop at the hypothesis? Yeah. The hypothesis comes before any testing happens. So a hypothesis is merely just somebody's best guess, best thing that they can figure out. Well, now does a hypothesis, does it need to be measurable and easy to figure out if it's right or wrong? Yeah. So then you set out this hypothesis and you begin testing it. You begin experimenting over and over to see. The purpose of the experimenting is to see, is my hypothesis true or is my hypothesis false? What if I find out it's true? What if I say, here's my hypothesis, and I test it and the test says it's true? Then what? What, Bill? Test it again. What did you say, Nicole? One test is not, I proved my hypothesis to be true. Guess what you're going to want to do? Stop. I'm done. No, you go back. What if I figure out it's false? I was wrong. No, you go back and the purpose of the scientific method is testing over and over and over again until you're able to come to at least some kind of consensus to see whether that hypothesis is true or if it's false. Here's where we get sticky. What if you have a hypothesis and you tested it and you experiment with it, and maybe your hypothesis wasn't exactly right to begin with, so you went back and you modified your hypothesis. Well, my testing is proving this not to be true, so I'm going to modify it. You modify it, you come back and test and experiment more. And after tests and experiments over and over and over, this seems to be right. I seem to be on to something here. My tests are beginning to support and confirm that my hypothesis was true. What happens then? Well, that hypothesis can then become classified as a theory. What's a theory? Is that scientific proof, and are we done? What's a theory? You ever had a theory before? They're kind of dangerous, aren't they? You ever had a theory before? A theory is a scientific fact. A theory is a hypothesis that's been tested and experimented, and this is looking pretty good. Once you have a theory, does that mean the testing and the experimentation is over? No. It just means that this has validated itself enough to continue to be tested. A theory in and of itself is not proof of anything. Other than there was a hypothesis, it's been tested, and it's looking pretty good, and so we need to continue to look at this. But yet theories need to be flexible enough to be adjusted. What does all of this mean? I don't know what's being taught, exactly what's being taught in our schools, but is there the theory of evolution? Is it called a theory? You have the theory of evolution. That's being taught as a law. Have you ever heard about the theory of evolution? And then you have somebody wants to put on the same plane the theory of creation. For something to be classified as a theory, it has to be observable. It has to have had a hypothesis, and that hypothesis must have been tested. What part of evolution can fall into that framework? Nothing. All of a sudden, our children are being taught about the scientific theory of evolution. Where is the first scrap of evidence for it? It doesn't exist. And yet here's our world that has bought into it 100%. And yet if we talk about observation of facts, it's not there. Nothing exists to prove it to be true. Any view which cannot be subjected to a testing process can't qualify as a theory. When you have discussions with your children, when you have discussions with people in your family, when you have discussions with your people at work, whatever it may be, and they begin talking about the theory of evolution, folks, we need to start defining terms. And we need, none of us are scientists. Some of us teach science. Does that make you a scientist? Oh. Smarter than me. Makes you a scientist. Put on a white robe and we'll worship you. So some of us are not no, we won't. I'm just kidding. Some of us are not scientists. Some of us will never be as smart as scientists. Some of us will never understand science. Hello? Will you ever understand science? I won't. Some of us like science. Some of us can't stand it. Some of us were happy with the C that we got in science. And we're glad it's over with. And we're a little perturbed that we lost an hour of sleep and now we're here talking about science because we can't stand it. But when people start talking about the theory of evolution, we need to say, hang on a second. How does something become a scientific theory? There's not a single scrap of anything to be observed or tested to start talking about science as as evolution as a scientific theory. So then what happens? Then after all of these things, and Nicole's already led us there, that theory can be established as a law. So something can become a theory, which means it just needs to be tested some more. It needs to be verified some more. And then one day it might graduate to become a law. You know any laws, real scientific laws? Law of gravity. Is that real? Have you ever tested that? Every day, right? Have you ever witnessed the law of gravity not existing, not being real? I'm talking about in your personal life, your day-to-day life. Has gravity ever proven itself to, maybe we need to bump this back to a theory and test it some more to see if it's real? It's real, isn't it? It's no longer in the observation testing. We're not sure about it. The law of, what other scientific laws do you know about? Thermodynamics. That's a big word for losing an hour of sleep, isn't it? You've got the law of thermodynamics. We're going to talk more about this next week. Where there has proven that when an object is in motion, it tends to what? Why does it do that? Why does it continue in motion? The law of entropy, the idea that things are running down, has that been proven? These are not just ideas that have come about in science. These are matters that have been proven themselves to the point that they are laws. Theories that are formulated, they're tested, and then their facts are firmly established to stand the test of time. Over and over and over, we know that gravity is real. The scuffs on our knees and the dropping of our glasses and our keys and everything else, it's real. So when we start talking about how does something become scientific law, Nicole says, and is evolution really being taught as a law, or is it just being conveyed as a law? Is it just being hinted to maybe be a law? It's being taught. Are you serious?
Media and everybody, they're all saying it is this way. I mean, we are bombarded everywhere. Nobody says it could be this way because it's a theory. Don't forget. There's no.
So evolution is being taught as a law. Well, do they use the word law when they're talking about it? Fact?
No, they use the word consensus the same way they do with global warming, and the idea behind that is everybody who's really smart agrees that this is true. They don't use the word law because they can't. It hasn't been true. But by using the word consensus,
Well, they use
drag everyone along.
they use the word theory, and it hasn't been proven to be a theory either. What do we need to do here? How do we deal with the fact that this has become a consensus? That here's things about scientific laws. When you talk about the law of thermodynamics, something that's been tested and proven, evolution's not a law. It's not a scientific law. And by definition, it's not a scientific theory either. And yet, here's what some scientists say. Think about this. These are the really smart people, right? Here's what scientists have said. Evolution is a scientific law as firmly established even as the rotundity of the earth. As much as we know that the earth is round, we know that there's evolution. Really? More recently, evolution is as well documented as any phenomenon in science, as strongly as the earth's revolution around the sun. As strongly as we know that the earth revolves around the sun, we know that evolution is true. We didn't always know the earth revolved around the sun. We didn't always know the rotundity of the earth, did we? But we've got pictures of the rotundity of the earth, don't we? I mean, those guys went to space and took a picture, and we've got a picture. Hey, the rotundity, it's around. Where's the picture of evolution? Anybody got any documentation on that? Video camera? Anything like that? You know, for somebody to say, this is as firmly established. Hello, it's not. Folks, when people make statements like this, we don't need to be ones who sit back and say, oh, well, you know, I'm just going to let that go. Words have meaning. Words have power. And when words are spoken by a powerful person, an educated, brilliant scientist, it has an impact on those minds of mush that don't know any better. Katie and Kelly go to Jupiter Christian, private school. Katie's fourth grade science book at a private, quote-unquote, Christian school still has millions of years and evolutionary things in the book that they're using at this school. If that's at my school, who knows what's at your school, at the public school? Yeah.
Because you can't buy textbooks now that don't have that background in it. You can't find them. They're not being printed, even for our private schools.
And that's because it's being accepted as a law.
It's as widely accepted as the rotundity of the earth, as the law of gravity. Well, are you going to have a science book that talks about gravity? Hello, why wouldn't you? Well, then you're going to have a science book that talks about evolution.
That's why this thing out in Texas right now about the textbook panels is such huge news, because there are people like us who are trying to keep these things out of our schools for kids to lose it back.
Jerry?
David, right now the world is at a point somewhat similar to what the world was at back when the true belief of the world's shape was flat. And anybody who believed otherwise was the dummy.
Yeah.
So it's the same type of
Yeah.
thing.
Well, when you lived back then, when everybody believed that the world was flat, and if you sailed too far, you would fall off the edge of the earth. Well, if you were somebody who wanted to sail out there and test it, okay, you're a little bit loony. When you get back, we'll put you in a rubber room. But if you want to go test that, you're a little bit dumb to think that the earth is not flat. And then the world all of a sudden opened up and we saw things a little bit better. Bill?
You took the science books that we had in our school system and tried to teach those today, that we laughed at because of the advances and the knowledge and everything that's been accomplished in 30 years.
Yep. Yep.
That is in itself, were those science books wrong at the time? That was the best knowledge they had at that
Exactly.
time. And I think that's where we are now. This is what they think they know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But who knows how many years it'll take finally for God's plan for people to accept. And what I've read recently on AP is there are a lot more scientists who are starting to drift away to the concept of there being some form of creator or whatever, not necessarily acknowledging God,
Right.
but they're starting to see they can't prove this.
But you know how hard it is for those scientists to drift over to a belief in some kind of a higher being who created all things, because they are ostracized, because they are marked for these beliefs. We'll at least talk about that more next week. But Bill's point, his first point was, look at the science books that we have today. Have your kid bring the science textbook home. Look at the copyright date. When was it published? Guarantee you it's probably well within the last 10 years. Yeah, same book redone sometimes. But are they using the same book that you used when you were in school? Why not? Because all of that stuff back then is superstition now, right? It's wait a minute. Then why do we keep believing this? Why do we keep believing this with all of our heart, with our guards down? Why do we keep allowing it to invade our minds? Let me talk just very quickly, because I want to get to something else. But we've mentioned these as we've gone through this scientific method. But I want you to see the fact that science in its study is limited. Science is not this great thing that's going to solve all of our problems. It's not going to answer. Science will not answer all of your questions. It's not going to happen. It's limited by perception. We talked about that. If it cannot be observed, if it cannot be sensed with our five senses, it does not fit in science. It cannot go through the scientific method. It deals with the present. It's got to be experimented with. It's got to be tested right here and now. If we're talking about something that happened in the ancient past, how do I experiment with it now? How do I test it now? How do I prove it to be scientific truth? Science deals with the present. It deals with how things happen, not necessarily the motivation behind them. It deals with, and not necessarily the why behind them, but it deals with how is this taking place? What are the mechanics of this happening? Science deals only with matter, with things that take up space, with the material things. Notice what these scientists say, both of them not creationists by any means. Here's one evolutionist that says, science does not embrace all phenomena, and it has not for its use all the criteria of truth. Here's an evolutionist who says, here's science, but even with science, you don't have all of the criteria of truth there. And here's a brilliant physicist, is what Time Magazine called him. That's not my estimation of him. But he says science deals with but a partial aspect of reality. You're not going to get everything with science. And there's not the faintest reason for supposing that everything that science ignores is less real than the world it accepts. Science can't touch on everything. It can't prove everything. So if science cannot prove the existence of God, somebody says, well, then God doesn't exist. Hang on a second. Just because something doesn't fall within the scientific method in the scientific realm does not make it real. Yes, ma'am.
I was just noticing the years of those quotes, 1924,
Old.
1940, and I wonder how many people would even want to know if those quotes even exist now.
They wouldn't want to know that those are older folks back in the past who really didn't understand, didn't know all of the advances that we've had today. Yeah, they're not so brilliant. The fifth thing that we see and the limitation of science is that it deals with things that are repeatable. And that's been implied in everything that we've said before. But these things must be repeated, and they must be verified, in order to be proven to be true. The evolutionary theory of spontaneous generation, that everything just sort of sprung to life from nothing, and this happened billions of years ago and all of that, how do they know that happened? Has that been repeated? Have they been able to test that and to see it happening over? There's no evidence at all. It can't be classified as science. It's speculation. And it's speculation that has no evidence at all. I wish we had time to talk about it, but Nicole mentioned the fact that those dates on those quotes were old. Bill mentioned the fact that the science books that were used in the last generation, those textbooks, they're no longer used anymore. We've had revised, we've had updated textbooks because those old textbooks, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 60 years ago, 100 years ago, were full of blunders. They were full of ideas that were called science. They were taught as science. Things like these. Oops, I went too far. Hang on. They taught that matter is eternal. They taught the spontaneous generation of life. Here's some of my favorites. There was the recapitulation theory. The idea that the human embryo, when it's inside the mother's womb, passes through all of the evolutionary stages before it's born. That's fun, isn't it? That's sort of like this preformation theory. The idea that in every woman's ova, there are miniature human beings that are inside there just waiting to come out. Did you know that? That used to be taught as science. You've heard probably about vestigial organs, organs that evolutionists want us to believe that we have inside of us that we don't need. They're just left over from our evolutionary process. There used to be that geocentric theory, that this earth revolved around the sun. We figured that one out, didn't we? We used to believe the earth was flat or supported by solid pillars. Or Aristotle taught that the human brain was composed of earth. I mean, some people is close, right? I mean, some people you wonder what's up there with some folks, right? But one of the most space, yes, forget matter, is space. One of the most brilliant men of all time said that our brains were made of earth. How does that work? And yet we know that that's not true. I put on this list this idea of man-made global warming. I think it's interesting to see what's happening in our scientific community. With all of these things that have come out, in the last 2 or 3 months, how all of this data, quote unquote data, that proved, quote unquote, that man-made global warming was happening, was all botched. It was fixed. In order to what? In order to manipulate people. You think that's what's happening with evolution? Something that's been made up by man in order to manipulate. But what if they're teaching evolution, what are they trying to manipulate you to do or to believe? That's it. They're not trying to push you in any direction towards something. They're trying to push you in a direction away from something. They're trying to get you away from God. Trying to manipulate you away from, yes. Isn't evolution proved wrong every time a new baby is born? I think evolution is proved wrong in a number of stances. But when you look, yes, when you look at the birth of a baby and what an event that is, you look at the whole process that comes about and what an event that is. Here's what we're going to try to do. What do we got? Oh, 1 minute. Here's what we're going to try to do this quarter, is to say here's what the Bible says. This ancient document that people say, oh, well, that's so old that it's just it's got these stories in it and it's got these nice little meaningful things in it, but it has no bearing on us today. How much science is there in the Bible? We're going to next week we're going to say, people say the Bible is not a science textbook. No, it's not a science textbook. Is there any science in it? Is the science in it true or not? Here's something interesting. All of those things, I don't know how many bullet points I had on that last screen, all of those things that used to be taught as science, does the Bible have any of those things in it? Does the Bible have any of those ideas in it? Or is all of the science that's in the Bible, is it accurate? Is it true? You know that it is. Here's what we need to know. Not everything that's called science today actually is. Somebody says, scientists believe, scientists discovered, scientists are saying this. Hang on a second. Not everything that is claimed to be science actually is, and we don't need to be intimidated when people start quoting scientists. When people say, well, science proves, give me 15 seconds. When people say science proves that God doesn't exist or that it undermines faith. When science says, well, Jesus didn't really rise from the dead, or science says that the world just happened by a big bang. Because I know what the Bible says. And the author of the world is the author of the Bible. And those two things go hand in hand. So if there's something that somebody says or science proves that contradicts something in the Bible, guess what I know? That's not right. The Bible's right. The Bible's right every time. We're going to see that as we go through this quarter. Thank you for